All right. Call to order this first meeting of the Registered Sanitarian Advisory Committee for 2017. Before I do roll call, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you wish to speak, before you speak, identify yourself, and for any public comments, if you would please identify who you are representing if it's not yourself. Secondly, I would ask that the committee please receive authorization through the chair prior to speaking in order to maintain a proper protocol. At this time, we'll do roll call, and I would ask that as your name is called, you please, and just not just say aye, but state your name and tell us just a brief tidbit about yourself. My name is Jim Dingman. I'm the presiding officer. I am the environmental health manager for the city of Plano. Dalton Knight.
I'm a sanitarian for the Northeast Texas Public Health District.
Sean May.
Present, I am the Environmental Health Director for the Bi-City County Health District that is headquartered out of Amarillo, Texas.
Stephen Cotzados.
I'm the Director of Environmental Health and Code Compliance for the City of McAllen.
Lisa Pomeroy.
Lisa Pomeroy, I'm the Program Health Manager for Bureau Veritas.
Terry Ricks.
Aye, present. I am retired from the San Antonio Metropolitan Health District.
All right, thank you. All are present. We do have a quorum. At this point, we'll proceed to any public comment. Seeing none, we'll proceed to staff reports. First off, from the executive office.
Mr. Chairman, I think we need to go back to the training for a second. I believe Doug wanted to talk to you guys just a little bit about that. If we can go back to item C, please, just briefly.
Oh,
Sure.
yes. I forgot to mention, Brian told me to remind you that we gave you the introductory training at the summit, and I know that was about 30, 60 minutes. And so today we will need to do the full training. I'm sorry to tell you it's going to take 2.5 hours.
That's our first joke, and you guys, you should see your faces.
I was excited more, man.
You're on real audio, and that moment just caught you guys. So we're trying to gauge the same human found.
I'm disappointed.
Stop laughing.
Okay. Let's see.
Brian Francis, executive.
Oh, you won. Okay, now back to staff report.
First of all, it's good to have everyone. Thank you guys for traveling. We appreciate your service. As we said for the summit, thank you. We had 100% about your organization. I will not mention what Brian got. You go through Dale and make everything happen. Just this process, the way we do it at our advisory board committee, with all the comments that we're so with. Typical 3 or 4 categories, depending too high, it's just too low, whatever the answer is. I got a great idea that we want those are published. Which you'll come out of that meeting and make a motion for recommending the commission to adopt. You get the book in, you're able to see it on the front end and before it goes to our commission. And we do that with all of our advisory boards. That process has worked tremendously for us. What it provides for not just the advisory committee, but for the industry and the public, it gives them 4 touches. At the first advisory board meeting, there's opportunity for public comment. During the public comment period, when it's published in Texas Register, that's your second time. The third time is at the advisory board meeting to review the comments, and then they get a 4th bite at the apple when at our commission meeting. And for us, it just makes sense that there's many eyes on it. Make sure this will be your section later on. And he's just going to walk you through how the rules are structured, arrange them from where they were in the structure. Questions, joke. leave the meeting at time, so I won't be the target of it. But I just wanted to welcome you here, and I'm excited about it. This is going to be a great relationship. Let's make it easy, but also make it tough. There'll be points where we have a different perspective, and we'll just talk them through. We'll just talk them through. You guys are going to enlighten us, guys being generic and gender-free. You're going to enlighten us of what it is out there in the real world. We're going to tell you what the regulatory experience is, figure it out, and find a way to make it work and make both groups have the best rules we can, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Compliance report.
Good morning, members. I'm Steve Ells, Medical and Health Profession Manager within the Compliance Division, and this is...
How you doing? Stuart Myrick. I work in the Medical and Health Profession section of the Compliance Division.
Welcome. Good morning. To start with, we're a review of the Compliance Division, and I heard some of this information, but a brief reminder in the three sections: business, mechanical, business and bidding, and medical and health professions. And our duties related to the Sanitarian program also within the medical professions section, which contains the programs that are transferred from the Department of State Health Services, as well as a couple of programs. Stuart serves on my team. Katie is our lead specialist that's assigned to the Sanitarian program, Katie Bryce, and she's unavailable today. She unfortunately has come down with a bad cold, and so Stuart serves as her secondary backup, and so he's with us today. Within the Compliance Division, our duties include providing subject matter expertise and a single point of contact for technical or more complex inquiries. We manage and conduct profession-related studies, such as comparison of what's going on in other states. We consult with our divisions. It's primarily enforcement, licensing, E&E, customer service, on various issues that may arise from those divisions where they need our expertise. We create newsletters, we work on web content, and one of our big functions is presentations at stakeholder conferences and meetings. And we've done some of that this year, and Stuart's going to talk about that in a few minutes. You'll receive a report from us at every meeting that looks very much like what you got for this one. And we will include any personnel updates that may have occurred. We will provide a list of our public outreach activities. And just to let you know, throughout the Compliance Division in FY17, our staff conducted over 254 educational presentations and training events and hosted booths at conventions and seminars. So we do a lot of that type activity. We'll include any information on ongoing projects, a couple statistics that need to be presented at that time. So that's kind of a brief overview of our Compliance Division here at TDLR. Wanted to talk a little bit about the transition of the Sanitarian program to TDLR from the Department of State Health Services. Senate Bill 202 from the 2015 session required the transfer of 13 programs from DSHS to TDLR. That occurred in two phases. 7 programs were transferred in Phase 1, which occurred on October 1st, 2016. 6 more programs were in Phase 2, which occurred just a month ago on November 1st. And in Phase 2, that included the Sanitarian registration program. We began planning for this process 2 years ago, and the planning for Phase 2 began intensively about a year ago, right upon the completion of Phase 1. We formed a team to plan and monitor and troubleshoot all the transition-related activities. We included DSHS staff on that team, and we held weekly meetings over the last year. DSHS participated in those meetings, and their collaboration was really important in making this successful. Our team was made up of staff from each of our functional areas, so licensing and enforcement, customer service, general counsel. So we had broad representation from all the different parts of the agency that would be involved in program administration. We worked on reviewing all the DSHS forms and publications, what was suitable to continue using here at TDLR, and then revising those things for our use. We got those up on the web. We worked on a lot of web content that you see today, FAQs, how to get a license, what is a sanitarian, all those types of things. Our go-live day was November 1st, and we had established a lot of priorities for baseline things that had to happen on that day. We knew we had to have our front-facing IT functions available, so the public had to be able to search for a license holder and verify that license. We knew that people needed to be able to apply for a license and renew a license, both online or through the mail, and we needed to be able to process and issue those licenses very first day. We knew that we needed to answer the telephone and respond to email inquiries, as well as intake consumer complaints. We established a monitoring headquarters using our team members, and we closely monitored all of those functions for the first 3 business days in a very structured way. One of the big focuses in the beginning was processing pending work from DSHS. Their systems had to be taken down about a week and a half prior to the transfer so that we could have a real clean and efficient transfer of data to TDLR, which meant they still had applications and renewal transactions coming in, but they were unable to process those. All of that sort of pending work was hand carried to us on the 31st of October, and then we spent the first couple of weeks making sure that all those issues were caught up, the backlog was eliminated, and everyone that had sort of a pending transaction with DSHS, that we gave them the proper attention and got all that resolved. Our program monitoring and troubleshooting continues in this very important early phase, and will do so into the future. The first 30, 60, 90 days, as you might imagine, are very important, and so we're paying close attention to all the various metrics associated with the program. Overall, though, I would report that the transition was successful. We saw minimal disruption to the normal operation of the program, and we did our public outreach efforts in the last 10 days. We contacted Mr. Dingman to get his perspective on how things have gone. We also spoke with Mr. O'Brien, the president of the Texas Environmental Health Association. We received overall very positive feedback during those contacts. Any questions or discussion about the actual transition of the program and how we approach that? Okay. So I'll turn it over to Stuart to talk a little bit about what we've done this year in terms of public outreach.
As Stephen mentioned, public outreach is one of our priorities when it comes in the compliance division. Doing presentations, being able to reach out to the population of the profession, and we take that very seriously. As you can see on the report, we've already been very active in that respect. Doing presentations at the Central Texas Environmental Health Association meeting back in May. Went to the Panhandle for their association meeting in Odessa in June, and then more recently the state Texas Environmental Health Association Conference that was here in Austin back in October. In addition, Katie Bryce will be, excuse me, at the South Texas Environmental Health Association meeting in South Padre Island coming up later this week, and she'll have a presentation ready and be available to answer questions from licensees and greet them and greet everybody that attends that conference. So as I said, the presentations, compliance, public outreach is a huge part of what we do in the compliance division. Any questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and we look forward to working with you.
Likewise.
Steve, before you leave, Mr. Chairman and members, are there any other groups that we need to start plugging into to make sure that we're attending their meetings as well? I know like with the cosmetology, they have a couple of associations, so different groups. So is there anyone else that we need to make sure that we get on their agenda and we're reaching out to those groups? And if you don't have the answer now, just it's something that we definitely want to avail ourselves of.
The Texas Environmental Health Association is broken up into 6 different chapters, so I would suggest you visit each of those.
Okay.
As well as Texas Wastewater Association. Excuse me, they have a conference every year, and they are frequently a part of the health department's programs, the on-site program, and so that might be an additional source of exposure.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right. Education and Examination Division update.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Ray Pizarro, Director for the Education Examination Division, and welcome to the first meeting. As you can tell, education examination, we are oversee continuing education, the initial education on some of the industries, and we also administer exams through a third-party vendor, PSI. We administer close to 60,000 exams a year. There's several different industries that we're in examination compared to being and have one of those as well. We do commerce with you guys on that. As of November 1, we started administering the exam with PSI, and 2 people have taken it since and have passed it. You'll see on the report, don't be alarmed, this is an example. The report, it shows, this is kind of what you will see in the future on this right here. You'll see that in the future on how we lay out the examination statistics. Keep in mind, these are attempts, not people. So sometimes you can have maybe 4 or 5 times the same person taking the exam. So when you see these numbers, it's an attempt. You can, if you would like to see a different types of data, a different report, just feel free to ask us, and we'll provide that information to you if we do so. A candidate information bulletin looks like this from PSI. It'll show the content outline for the candidates who are taking the examination. It's available online. Those candidates who contact PSI and register, they will get a candidate information bulletin. Once they become eligible by TDLR, PSI will send them a postcard and an email. If they don't have an email, they'll send them a postcard. If they have an email, they will send them an email and let them know they can register with PSI to sit for their examination. That's kind of how that works. So as we speak, hundreds and thousands of people are taking the exams for all of the industries where we regulate. Any questions so far? Pretty clear? That's kind of, and like I said, anything else, I don't want to prolong the meeting, but let me know if there's something else you would like to see or any type of reporting. But we're going to try to give you this kind of thing, and you'll see it by quarterly, yearly on the trend on how they pass. Now, keep in mind, the Sanitarian, there's not going to be a lot of attempts. You don't have a huge population, so don't be alarmed if 2 people take the exam, 1 fail and 1 pass, and it's a 50% pass rate. Don't say, "Oh my God, everybody's failing." So you have to understand it. It's the the percentage-wise. It's usually when you have at least 50 attempts, you're going to get a better statistic on that, okay? And that's all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
Anybody have any questions? Thank you. Okay, moving on to the Enforcement Division update.
Mr. Chairman, she typically has some Star Trek playing in the background, but we haven't been able to work through the copyright issues for that.
Okay.
Good morning,
Good morning.
ladies and gentlemen. I'm Christina Kaiser. I'm the director of the Enforcement Division, and I would actually prefer some deep down in the club dance music, not Star Trek. So I know that you all attended the summits that we held in November, and so I'm not going to give you the same presentation I did then. Just to give you a brief reminder of what enforcement is about. Enforcement is the division that handles complaints that are filed against all the different industries and occupations regulated by TDLR. We have 104 people in the division, and for all programs combined at TDLR, we investigate and resolve about 12,000 complaints in a year. So we're busy. We do a lot. The materials that are in your stuff for the meeting are we reflect here the basic structure of the Enforcement Division, and we talked about this before. The Enforcement Division is made up of 3 basic sections: the intake, investigations, and prosecution. And those 3 sections essentially mirror the life cycle of a complaint as it moves through the enforcement process. Intake receives a complaint first, determines if we have jurisdiction, determines if there's enough information there to justify proceeding with an investigation, and if so, the case is forwarded to an investigator who, of course, investigates, interviews parties, gathers documentary evidence, consults with an expert witness when that is needed, and prepares an investigative report, and then passes the case on to the prosecuting attorney. And that's a fundamental in our world. A lawyer will review every case and determine the manner in which it will be resolved, whether we seek formal penalties or license sanctions against a person, or resolve the case informally through other means. The majority of cases each year are resolved informally. And I can just tell you, I don't anticipate, looking at history and just looking at what your profession does, I don't anticipate that we're going to have a lot of business with your profession. In the big picture sense, we're sort of in the same business about protecting the public and consumers. So I don't see that we're going to have a whole bunch of folks knocking down the door trying to file complaints. However, in the event that does happen, there are a couple of pieces of business that enforcement needs to do with this advisory board. On your agenda today at, I believe it's item G, there's a request to appoint a work group, which will be a number of members from your advisory board, that's less than a quorum, to work with enforcement on developing 2 very important enforcement policy documents that we need to have in place just in case. One of those is the criminal conviction guidelines that we use to screen license applicants who have criminal convictions to determine whether we may choose to deny someone's license based on their criminal history. And the other is the penalty matrix, which sets out the penalties and license sanctions that a person may be subject to if they violate your statute and your rules. That's a standard, those are standard policies that we have in place for all of the industries and professions that we regulate. And so even though we don't anticipate a lot of business with you guys, we need to have it there in that one-off chance that something should happen. In our written materials, we have a little bit of information about the sources of complaints that are most common in the enforcement process. Generally, we group them into 3 categories. Consumer complaints, which is anything from anyone outside of TDLR, largely consumers. Also, other government agencies file complaints, like in the air conditioning program, for example, the city of San Antonio. Inspector on the ground out there conducting an inspection may file a complaint with us about a violation of the mechanical code, or even about unlicensed activity by an air conditioning contractor. Industry people will sometimes complain against each other. That's another body of work that falls into that consumer category. So that makes up about 1/3 of everything we do in a year in enforcement. About 40% of all the work we do each year is derived from inspections in TDLR's program for recurring inspections that are required law. Examples are vehicle storage facilities, cosmetology salons, barber shops. So in those programs, when the field operations inspectors discover violations out there on scene, they will refer some of those violations to us, and that makes up, like I said, about 40% of everything we do. And the third big body of work are the criminal background cases that I talked about. When someone applies for a license with TDLR, they are subject to a criminal background check, and then if their criminal background check, when compared to those criminal conviction guidelines, yields convictions or deferred adjudications that may be cause for alarm, then that is forwarded over to the Enforcement Division, and our lawyers make a decision about whether we should deny that person's license. So on this last page, that's what that pie chart is in the middle. That's just the breakdown of those three big categories of complaints. There are a lot of other statistics represented there. The numbers at the top that we identify as performance measures, these are actual performance measures in the formal sense that we report to the legislature on a quarterly basis. I mentioned some of those. The cases open and cases closed, you see those are both in the 12,000 per year range. Average time to close cases is a number we're pretty proud of and that we pay a lot of attention to all the time. We're currently, or at the end of fiscal 2017, we were at 142 days. At the bottom of that page are some other numbers just representing outcomes of cases. So I'll commend those to your reading. I am happy to answer any questions that you may have about enforcement or about any of the materials, and I believe I'm going to see you again at agenda item G.
Okay. Any questions from the All right. I guess
All right.
not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. The licensing division update.
Good morning, Chairman, board members, and welcome. I'm Lisa Hodek, the licensing manager. In your notebooks, you have the licensing division PowerPoint presentation that Dee Dee McEachern went over in the summit meeting. As most of you or all of you were present, so you already know that information. I won't go over that again. However, I will be happy to answer any questions that you have in your notebooks for the licensing division, if you have any. No?
Any questions?
Okay, I'll move on.
All right.
So I was part of the transition team, new programs, and several of us went to DSHS to learn how to train on the Sanitarian licenses, learning the new system and that type of thing. Two of my staff members also went as well to learn the new program, so we've been training and trying to follow up on all that. My two leads have just done a great job on all of this. We also helped with moving and purging and bringing over the active files. Also wanted to mention that DSHS had extended license renewals for 90 days, and that started in October, so that was October through December. And that was to reduce the demand for services and preventive measures in case there were any IT issues or anything like that. Prior to the meeting, I passed out the Sanitarian licensing statistics that you should all have. It's very brief because, as you know, we're just starting, but we have issued 2 professional sanitarian licenses, and out of the 2, one of those was issued online. Our total population is just over 1,200. The Sanitarian in training, we issued 3 new licenses, none online, and the total population is 77. And the reason I think for no renewals at this time is because DSHS did extend the expiration dates on those. And that pretty much concludes my report. In the future, I will be presenting you with pretty much what I have here as far as new licenses, renewals, and total population. I'll be happy to present anything else if you have any other questions, or I can answer any questions that you may have in general.
Anyone have questions? I guess we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to discussion of rules 16 Texas Administrative Code Chapter 119.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, members, Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel for the department. Thank you all for being here today. It was a pleasure to meet you all at the summit, and I'm glad that we have a full crowd, and we're ready to get down to business. I just wanted to give you, this is not going to be a rule-by-rule overview necessarily, unless you have specific questions. Just wanted to kind of introduce you, and you may have heard this already, just to our philosophy of rulemaking here at TDLR. As you know, in order for one of our licensing or registration programs to work, we have to have rules in place. And they set out the theory, the practices, and the procedures of how the program should work. And of course, we're always confronted by new problems and questions that arise that sometimes the rules don't answer. And so part of what we'll be asking you to do later today is to take a closer look at the rules and figure out where those problems might be. But for right now, just want to tell you what really guides us. When we as an agency brought the rules over from DSHS, our goal, we had a few goals. Our primary goal, at least in my opinion, is to make sure that our licensees suffered as little disruption as possible. Because the legislature changed kind of the home of this program, we wanted that to be all distress, just right there. We wanted to make sure that when we brought the program over, that the rules, even if they didn't look exactly the same, worked the same in practice. And so you'll see, Delia handed out a cross-reference chart that's in your materials, and you'll see as you look through that, there are a few sections where you see substantive changes and additional notes. And what we tried to do when translating the rules from a DSHS format to the TDLR format is, unless we had to make a change for some specific reason to the content of a rule, we didn't make it unless we had to. And so you'll see that in section 119.2, you'll see we added some definitions, had to do that to make the program work here. Later on, you see a lot of NAs, and that's, it doesn't look like much on the chart, but that actually speaks volumes. And that means that the substance of the rule, even though it may have been reworded, didn't change. And once again, that's because our goal was to provide as little disruption as possible. You will see on your chart, Rule 119.10, we expanded the size of your board and expanded the number, raised the number of registered sanitarians on the board from 3 to 5. And we also eliminated fees, eliminated some fees and reduced other fees. Our goal, at least for the Office of General Counsel, is whenever we took on a project of translating rules from DSHS to TDLR, was initially to try to organize those in a familiar format. One of the things we try to do for all of our programs is have a familiar numbering scheme. There are some programs that are fairly simple in scope, and some programs here that are just very complex, have to have multiple subchapters. This is a little bit closer, the model for your rules is a little bit closer to the simple structure, but not completely, because this is not a very simple program. We have some that are just, a license is provided if you meet X and Y, and there's not a lot to it. This has a lot, I'd say, more wrinkles to it. And so you'll see that your rules are fairly lengthy. One thing that we did that you will notice is that when we brought the rules over, I think we reduced the word count by 50%. I don't have the exact number. And not all of that, I don't want to pat us all on the back for all of that. A lot of those provisions were redundant. We have a section of our rules at TDLR, it's Chapter 60, that really addresses a lot of matters that are common to all of our programs. Military, granting military experience, dealing with fees, dealing with the process of reporting complaints and how those proceed. And so we were able just to take those out of the rules and just delete them entirely, rather than reword them. So that saved us some space. However, I will pat us all on the back for, we didn't try, I think maybe like one rule, I think with continuing education, we tend to take that over verbatim, because that could potentially be the most disruptive. But for most of the other rules, we tried to what we call plain talk them, and that just means make them easy to understand. I want, one of my goals for my programs is I like a person who, if they have a question about fees, no matter the program, they know they need to go to section, whatever the chapter is, point 80. And I want them to be able to look at that section and know very quickly, without having to wade through legalese, what the appropriate fee is. Also, if they have a question about a standard of conduct, I don't want them to have to get out their, Latin to English dictionary and look through that. It should be very clear, it should be very plain. And part of that is using easy to understand terminology. Part of it is syntax, and part of it is just good old plain common sense. We don't want anyone to be confused. Obviously, there are some times when we have to say things like shall and engage in some kind of these typical legal terms, but we try to avoid that as much. And if I didn't of that, I would from Mr. Francis. So that's one of the key points he's impressed upon us in all of our rulemaking. And you will see from the structure of the rules, you could just look at the table of contents. It's going to be very similar for this program and for other programs, whether it's electricians, code enforcement officers. I also handle air conditioning and refrigeration. You'll see a kind of a theme. You'll see that eligibility.
Hold on one second.
Sorry?
So we're on page 22 in your, in front of you on your screen.
Oh,
I want to
okay.
make sure they were on the same page.
Thanks.
Done an excellent job. Good patting on the back, too.
Oh, yeah. You'll see that generally our rules around subsection or around point 20 usually deal with eligibility and licensure requirements. Somewhere in the mid-20s, you'll see references to continuing education and educational requirements. Standards of conduct, what's expected of the licensees will be in point 70, and so on. And so this wasn't an arbitrary numbering. This went according to plan. And we're deeply and very personally involved in bringing the rules over. Everyone in this room had a hand in commenting and helping structure this. So though I'm presenting it to you, I'm by no means, I'm just a player in this. And so, but I believe we ended up with a very good product. But as we all know, there's always room for improvement. Any questions so far?
Guess we're good.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to kind of move on to the work group
Sure.
portion. And you'll see, as I say, there's always room for improvement. We'd like to kind of to split you into some groups to look a little more closely at certain provisions and tell us what can be improved, what can be clearer, if there are any substantive changes that need to be made. As I mentioned, these rules, at least in substance, are identical to what came over from DSHS, except with a few minor exceptions. So you may see some opportunities for improvement, and we definitely would like your feedback. And that, the work group, just to let you know how that will work, you'll probably meet by teleconference 1 or 2 times before your next meeting. The first may just be a brainstorming session. If you have some time before the first work group meeting, try to come to the meeting with some ideas, some proposals of what you'd like to see changed. And then the work group will just kind of hash that out. And ultimately, at your next meeting of the full board, your work group will present your recommendations. And if that comes up with a proposed rule, then the full group will talk about that, and we will start the rulemaking process. But this is a thing that, starting now, could take a year plus. So, obviously, if there are any high priority issues, we want to know about that in your first work group meeting, so we can start working on those and start pushing those up on our calendar. So the first group we ask you to form deals with enforcement. As Ms. Kaiser mentioned earlier, this group will make recommendations regarding our criminal conviction guidelines and penalty matrix and help determine which crimes are directly related to the occupation of registered sanitarian. Now, this group will have a lot of work to do up front, but again, as Ms. Kaiser alluded to, probably there won't be a need to revisit the penalty matrix very often. So this will be kind of a one-time work group for now. We may revive it later on, but there are these pieces we have to have in place at the inception of the program to make sure that our enforcement works efficiently. And so secondly, we'd like to create a licensing work group. And that group will look at the eligibility provisions in the rules and also, I think most importantly, consider what types of experience count toward the qualifications for registered sanitarian. There is a very involved, very detailed rule that we have dealing with that, and that will be one of the key tasks for that work group. And then lastly, we'd ask you to create an education and examination work group dealing with continuing education provisions and examination, issues dealing with examination. And I would expect that the licensing and education and examination work groups would be standing. The members may change, but there's almost always a need to keep an eye on those issues. So, Chair, I will hand it to you at this point.
All right. Thank you, Doug. What we need to do is come up with people to fill in these spots on the work groups. And so there are 6 of us and 3 work groups. So we're going to at least, hopefully, each of us is going to be sitting on two. If you would like to do more, please let me know. I would just ask, though, that you give it some serious thought at the start so that you don't overextend yourself. I know each of us have jobs to do that we get paid for, and not that this isn't paying us in some way or other, Brian, but that we support our families on. So please please keep that in mind as you volunteer. So I'll just open up the floor for general discussion on groups that you might like to serve on. Terry, I already have you on the education one. So, anyone have a preference?
I would like 1 and 2. Enforcement and licensing.
I've known you for years, and I still stumble over how to spell your last name.
Do you need me to tell you?
No. I just have to think a minute. Sean, I saw you.
Yeah, I'm interested in 2 and 3.
Next.
I'll do 3 and 4.
We just to be
Not,
clear,
we're
yeah.
not doing 4. We're just doing 1, 2, and 3.
2 and 3.
Okay. Gentlemen,
What spots are still open? I'm kidding. 2 and 3, is that still, are those full?
We can go up to 4 members, Mr.
we
Chairman.
can
so-
put 4, yeah. Ray?
Yes.
Ray.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Terry? Just 3?
Yeah, I was leaning toward just working on the educational aspect of it.
Okay.
But I can help with licensing too.
Okay. We're full on both of those, too.
Oh, okay.
Switch me to
Fine.
1. Switch me to 1. Let
From-
him take 3.
From
Take 3.
3.
Okay.
Yeah. Switch me to
I already have him on 3.
Yeah.
Right. So you can switch me to 1 because I think there's only 1 person.
There's 2. Okay.
2.
Oh,
So 1 and 2. Maybe.
okay.
Jim, Sean, I'm happy to help with 1 if you need somebody. But I'm happy to help.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just tell the members, the heavier lifting is going to come on enforcement and education. The licensing standards pretty much are going to be what they are based on the statute. That's just kind of carrying those over. But the heavy lifting, and then ultimately when we get the standard of care group, that one's really going to be wrestling with a lot of stuff. But so enforcement and education, we'll have a little bit more conversation.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So what I have for work group 1, the enforcement, is Sean, Ray, Lisa, and myself. Number 2, licensing, Lisa, Sean, Stephen, and Ray. And number 3, education enforcement, Terry, Sean, and Stephen. Okay. All right, so what we'll need to do is each of the groups will need to meet via conference call. At this point, I will initiate the conference call for the enforcement work group. Lisa, if you will do likewise for licensing, and Terry, if you will do likewise for education and enforcement. Not to say that us 3 will be leading those work groups, but at least initiating the conference call to begin with. Then at the conference calls, you amongst you can decide who's going to be the leader of that committee.
Mr. Chairman, we'll give kind of have Christina go to the table and give you a little overview of kind of how we try to help with the work groups,
Okay.
To take a lot of pressure off of the folks there.
Okay.
At each of the you'll have available, so I'll let Christina kind of describe the enforcement work groups kind of.
So typically, what we'll do is for Russie, who is the specialist for the division, we already have a draft ready to bring to a work group for the criminal convictions and the penalty criminal convictions first. What we do is we will reach out to you members and figure out a date that is acceptable to everybody for the first meeting. It can be, you can all participate by conference call. If somebody wants to come in person, you're welcome to do that as well. We typically have a mix. Some people come in person, some people are. And historically, we have needed about 2 meetings per document. So 2 for criminal guidelines, 2 for penalty. Sometimes we can get done, sometimes the average. And the staff will be here in this building, up in the enforcement division, which is on the 3rd floor. If anybody wanted to join us, come to this room. And we will typically schedule the meetings for no more than about 3 hours at a time, because after that, people can't continue to pay attention for that long and be engaged and interested. So that's kind of how we have typically done these work group meetings in the past, if that is acceptable to you.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so somebody in enforcement, licensing, and education will be contacting the group, setting up the time and everything, and the date. Perfect.
Right, yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You forward this to me so I know who's on the team and who I need to contact?
Oh, well, they'll
Or are they gonna-
they'll contact everybody on the team and arrange it.
That's correct. Our staff, Doug Jennings, our staff will be in touch with you and arrange those, find out what dates work for you, what times, provide you with a teleconference number. And so we really do the logistics.
Okay.
And, we'll work with you if you have any suggestions as to, here's the kind of idea I'd like to discuss. Could you maybe draft up a rule, something like that? And we can, we can prepare something so we have something to talk about at the meeting other than, if you have good ideas beforehand. So you can always share those with us in advance.
Mr. Chairman, will enforcement be sending us copies of all the information they already have? You said you had a pre-drawn document for you had a rough draft?
Yes, we do already have a draft available, and we will definitely send that to you in advance of the meeting so you can take a look at it. Part of the first meeting where we talk about criminal conviction guidelines will just be a little bit of education for you about that whole process and how what we do fits together with what licensing does, and then how the law that we apply relates to all of that. Because the criminal conviction guidelines, the criminal conviction process is largely governed by a separate law, Chapter 53 of the Occupations Code. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And we have a handful of stuff that we'll provide you in advance. So if you want to read some of that stuff and really dig into it, you're free to do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you know when the meetings will start?
I don't anticipate that the work groups will happen before Christmas.
All right, any other questions on the work groups?
Mr. Chairman, could you
Yes, sir.
please repeat the members for the education and examination work group, just so we can...
Sure. Education examination, Terry Ricks, Sean May, and Stephen. I'm not even going to try to pronounce your name again because I'm not sure I got it right the first time or not.
You did. Good status.
As Christina kind of touched on for the work groups, I think it's really also a good opportunity for the members to dig a little deeper underneath the hood. That's where you can really start asking the questions about the education process. So, Ray, how does your team continue in education? How many folks do you have in there? Because you signed up for it, but people are going to ask you questions out there in your industry. So what is TDR's process for doing a complaint? And you'll be able to have a little bit better understanding when you're on that enforcement work group. So how do they review courses? I had a course that's submitted, and who do I need to talk to? Oh, well, let me get you in touch with Ray Pizarro. So being able to understand a little bit of how, the things are working behind the curtain, I think is going to be very helpful. So in those work groups, really dig in, ask the staff, those questions. Well, I looked at the webpage and I saw you guys had 2 forms for X. Why don't you have a form for Y? And they'll be able to give you some really a bigger picture of how things operate. I think it's important for your group.
Would we be able to get copies of each work group's drafts or information so that even though we're not on that work group, if we had a question or there was something that we wanted to provide to the group, even though we're not going to be part of the process?
Lisa, great question. You may recall from the training, that would create that walking quorum.
Oh, I got you.
So if you are on two work groups, for instance, so Lisa, you're on enforcement and licensing. You can't bring the conversation from enforcement over to licensing. Hey, well, on the enforcement one, we talked about X.
Right.
Because now you're moving it possibly up to that 5 members. So you will be able to get the information from each of the work groups, but it'll be in this meeting.
Okay.
When you hear what education and examination said, and Terry would hear for the first time what licensing and enforcement said. But you guys will provide reports and talk about that, okay?
Any other questions? All right. Move on to agenda item H, recommendations for agenda items for next meeting.
So, Mr. Chairman, you're going to definitely have the standard fare. You'll have another dose of training. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. You'll have the staff reports. We'll bring you up to speed on any rule proposals that are outstanding. There will be none. We'll bring you up to speed on statistics from the staff going forward. We'll have work group reports. They'll be at that meeting. There'll also be an agenda item that will say possible action from the work groups. I would anticipate that if Christina has her way, we'll have on the agenda the approval of the criminal conviction guidelines, and maybe even the penalty matrix. So you may have 2 action items coming out of the enforcement work group for sure. And then, of course, if there are any other agenda items that the members want to talk about, they can send it to Delia, and then we'll go here, and the Mr. Chairman will always bounce those off of you.
Okay.
Before the meeting is set.
Sounds like a plan. All right. Last item on the agenda is discussion of date and time and location of next committee meeting. I'm assuming it will be here.
It will be here, and Delia's got some dates that she'll be able to offer you in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, May. Yeah, May is fine.
Mr. Chairman, does May or April work for the committee?
I'm assuming either one will be fine. I mean, unless somebody's going to be gone the whole month. Excuse me.
So we've got a wide open calendar in May, so Delia, let's start throwing out some dates. So we've got the members, do you have a preference on day of the week?
Monday, Tuesday works fine for
Okay.
me, as does Thursday, Friday.
All right, just no Wednesday. That's what I'm hearing. Okay, so we have the 7th and the 14th, 21st available in May. Those are all Mondays.
How
Start with
about
that.
everybody?
21st does not work for me.
Okay.
Me neither.
Okay.
You know, you're looking at college students, high school graduations and whatnot when you get into the end of May.
Okay. How
So
about
the 7th,
7th
you
and
think will be
8th?
better?
Having a meeting on the 8th, arriving the 7th or something, or meeting on the 7th?
And we'll go with the 7th and we'll.
When is Mother's Day?
13th.
So the meeting's
Oh.
7th.
May 7th, and Delia will reach out as we get closer to that date and give you plenty of time to see
Can
if
we-
there's any.
Can we bump it to the 8th?
8th is available.
The 8th, okay.
I'm sorry, yeah, because otherwise my rental car's gonna go through the weekend.
Oh,
I
I hear
pick it
you.
up on Sunday.
I hear you.
That's fine.
Okay, the 8th then?
Tuesday the 8th?
May 8th, Tuesday, 9 o'clock here. Soon,
Sound like a great plan?
What time did you say?
9 a.m.?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Great. All right, that wraps up the agenda. I'd like to thank you all for attending. Appreciate having a full group here, and the meeting is adjourned.